In preparation for putting on the new crankshaft timing sprocket and the nose bearing, I want this journal that they fit on to be nice and clean, so I use a little Autosol metal polish, and I got quite a bit of crud off of there, so that should make things easy to slide on. The other thing I did is this face of the engine block was all cruddy and dirty and oily, so I cleaned that up so it's nice and shiny. Another step of preparation is the crankshaft sprocket. You'll see there's a mark there, which is the indication that this is the tooth for getting the timing correct. But when the nose bearing's on front, you can't see that mark. So what I do is put a little bit of paint on that tooth, and then I can see that tooth. And the other thing I did was I put a little bit of paint on the little dimple here on the camshaft sprocket. So then when I go to get everything aligned, I can make sure that the tooth and the mark here will line right up. I'm ready to put the brand new crankshaft timing sprocket that I got from Euromoto Electrics on the journal. And a couple of things to note is there's a Woodruff key right here on the journal, and there's a slot right here in the sprocket, and so that slot will slide over the Woodruff key. Now, I've found in the past that when they machine the slot, sometimes there's just a little bit of a burr along the edge, so I use a very small triangular file and I dress the edge here to get rid of any burr, because that'll make it a lot easier for this sprocket to slide onto the journal. Now, the other thing about the sprocket is there's a longer face here than here, and the longer face is what goes toward the engine block. And when you put it on with the engine at top dead center, that Woodruff is just about at 9 o'clock, so that when you slide this on, the indexed tooth is right here at the bottom. Now, the other thing I do is I lubricate that journal, and I use a little bit of lard and wipe it all along on here, and then I heat this to about 350 degrees and it'll just slide right on. Now, sometimes when you go to put the sprocket on, it won't go all the way, it'll bind. So if that's the case, I use the CycleWorks tool, which has a pusher nose and a bolt, and there's also a sleeve on the end, which I put on the sprocket already while I heated it. And then all I have to do is put this on, thread the bolt into the crankshaft nose, and then tighten up the nut and push the sprocket all the way home. So we'll see if I have to do that on this particular sprocket. Okay, I have the sprocket, and this is the sleeve. That's the long face. This is the groove. I need to line that up with the Woodruff key and see if we can slide it all the way home. And it went all the way home, so I didn't need to use the CycleWorks tool. Now what I'll do is just hang on to it tight against the back of the journal until everything cools down, and then I should be good to go. Now, to install the nose bearing, I also heat that up to about 350. But to get it on, I use the CycleWorks tool. Now, there's a cylinder here, or sleeve. It has a flat face and a notched face. And that's the flat face that's going to go against the bearing to push it onto the journal. And the pusher, which is this and this bolt, the way that works is the bolt slides in and then it screws into the nose, and then I tighten up this nut and it'll push the bearing onto the journal. Now before I heat up the bearing, I set up the tools so I've got everything just about right. So I can very quickly, I've got the nut set just about tight. So I'll back it off just a little bit. Then I can put this whole assembly together while that bearing's still hot. And then I use 2 wrenches, one on the bolt head and one on the nut. Tighten up the nut and that'll drive the bearing onto the journal. Okay, I'm ready to put the bearing on now. So I'll try to get it on the nose here. Actually, it's going on almost all the way. So that's a good thing. I've never had that happen before. But I'm going to just ensure that it's on tight. So this is the flat face, goes up against the bearing, and then the pusher goes in, and I tighten up the bolt, and the little sleeve will center here. I want to center it on the bearing. There we go. And then I can tighten up the nut. Take my gloves off here. Now it's not quite centered. I want to make sure it's centered. There it goes. Okay. Now I'll just go ahead and tighten up the bolt just to make sure everything is nice and snug on there. Okay, that seems nice and tight. Now I'm visually looking here to make sure the bearing is tight up against the face of the sprocket, and also that the sprocket is tight up against the face of the journal. And it looks like it is, so I'm just going to let that sit till it cools down to make sure everything's nice and tight.